All right, everybody, we're pleased to welcome Ms. Hester M from the SEC. Ms. is joining us to discuss with Brian in a fireside chat, so I'll leave it up to Brian to make the introduction and get us moving. Thank you, Scott. And so we built this as a fireside chat, but this is an old building, they wouldn't let us bring a fireplace. So I hope that we don't get, no one comes after us for misleading statements. Because we really do want to have the fireside chat for the format here. So I'll introduce the fire in the conversation, right? So Commissioner, we had a chance to chat yesterday, and she mentioned that she, at the end of this, she's happy to take some Q&A. We have some time. She also mentioned, which I think many of the people in the industry are happy to hear, that she's happy to listen to the pain points that people are experiencing in the industry and share them directly with her. So if you have things that, maybe not in this forum, but at some point, if you have issues that have come up, please share them with her, because she's very much an advocate for seeing success in this industry. So we have a friend in the crowdfunding industry, and I think she wants to help make it successful. So with that, let me give a little bit of her bio, and after that, I'll give her a chance to make a standard disclaimer that people get to do. So Hester Peirce was appointed by President Trump to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and was sworn in on January 11, 2018. Prior to joining the SEC, Commissioner Peirce conducted research on the regulation of financial markets at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. She was a senior counsel on the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, where she advised Ranking Member Richard Shelby and other members of the Committee on Securities Issues. Commissioner Peirce served as counsel to the SEC Commissioner Paul Atkins. She also worked as staff attorney in the SEC's Division of Investment Management. Commissioner Peirce was an associate at Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, which is now Wilmer Hale, and she clerked for Judge Roger Anderwelt on the Court of Federal Claims. Commissioner Peirce earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Case Western Reserve University and her JD from Yale Law School. And she's from Ohio. We won't hold that against her. I'm a fellow Ohioan, so I can say that. So first, just I give you a chance to make the standard disclaimer.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks to all of you. It's great to be with you today. I do have to give a disclaimer, which is that my views are my own views as a commissioner of the SEC and not necessarily those of the commission or my fellow commissioners. It's really wonderful to be with a group of people who care about crowdfunding. I think there's a lot of potential in this space, and I think you all are trying to bring that to life. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner. So let's start off just a little bit about your personal bio. Can you share some just a little bit about your journey and how you found your way to that?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't planned. I didn't plan to become a lawyer. I sort of fell into it because I'm not great at math, and I had it as an alternate route, a PhD in economics, which is really a lot of math. So I decided to go to law school instead, and then didn't really know what I wanted to do with that, except I didn't want to work for the government. So I worked out really well. But economics and law kind of naturally meet in securities law, and so it was a good fit for me. And ultimately, when you're working at a securities law firm, you meet a lot of people who have been at the SEC, and you start to realize how important it is to understand things from the outside. So when I had the chance to go over there, I did, and so then when I left, I really hadn't intended to go to the Hill, but that was where there was a job for a securities lawyer that seemed right up my alley. So I ended up there, then went off to study financial regulation. After sort of being on Capitol Hill during the financial crisis, you start to think about how can we do financial regulation better? And so that was the reason that I went off to study that from an academic perspective, and then really didn't think I wanted to come back. I had worked for a commissioner. I didn't think I wanted to be back at the SEC as a commissioner. But again, things don't always turn out the way you expect. So the chance to weigh in on policy seemed like a good opportunity, and that's how I ended up back as a commissioner. And it's been a real honor to be in this role. There's a lot, I think, about our capital markets that's wonderful. And one of the things that I had hoped to do in coming back is making sure that our capital markets stay wonderful, but also that they are a place where people, more Americans can come, both as investors and as founders. So people from all over the U.S. should be coming to our capital markets to draw on them if they have good ideas and companies to build, and also to invest in them. And so, again, I think that's what you all in this room are committed to doing as well.
Now, it says you were sworn in 2018, January, so they're 5-year terms, so we're in bonus time with you, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's funny how it works. You come in, I came in on a stub term, so I only had a little bit on the term, and then I got a new full term, and that term ends in the middle of next year. So just a little bit longer to go.
So for those we have people who come in from all over the country. Some of them are not as familiar with the intricacies of Washington, D.C. or the Commission as others who maybe live here. Would you mind taking a little time just to talk about the decision-making process that happens within the SEC, especially at the Commission level?
Yeah, sure, and it is a little bit of a difficult thing to understand from the outside. I will say I've lived in Washington a long time now, and this is probably the most beautiful view I've seen. So you guys picked a really good spot to see into Washington. The commission is, as its name suggests, a commission. There are 5 of us commissioners, 1 of us is chairman, that's not me. The staff reports to the chairman. The chairman controls the budget and the agenda, so that's a pretty powerful role. But Congress set us up as a commission so that, and a politically balanced commission, so you can't have more than 3 from the president's party. And the idea is capital markets are something that we all care about, regardless of where you are in the political spectrum. And so you want to have a regulator that isn't changing policy radically from one administration to the next. You have more policy continuity. And so a lot of what we do is very it may be controversial, but not necessarily political, right? And that kind of is how we operate. That has changed a little bit because I think a lot of people are wanting companies to become more political, and then that sort of flows into what they want us to get companies to talk about in disclosure, which is unfortunate from my perspective. I don't think that's a good development. But in general, we all, the 5 of us, vote on every enforcement action, every rulemaking that comes out of the commission. We don't have areas of expertise. All of us work on everything. We have a staff of about 5,000 people, and some of the daily things that you think of the SEC doing, reviewing filings from public companies or from mutual funds, that's all done on delegated authority by the staff. We're not reviewing all of those, although in the old days they used to review every registration statement for every public company. That would be quite a job if we had to do that. But so a lot of the work is done at the staff level. They'll prepare a recommendation, and then it comes up for a commission vote. There'll be a lot of back and forth with the commission. And I think that kind of one other sort of weird facet is that there's something called the Sunshine Act. So the 5 of us, if we're sitting in a room together talking about policy, it either has to be a public meeting that everyone can see, or it has to be a meeting that's been closed because we're going to talk about enforcement issues. So as you can imagine, that does change the dynamic a little bit. You can't hammer things out in private, which I think is good, but it does make it sometimes a little hard to get to consensus.
Probably cuts back on the things you talk about, the true feelings sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop me, but it might stop others.
So let's get into some sort of the issues. There's been a lot of discussion here about the use of GAAP financials and how that's problematic for some companies, and that the Small Business Administration is far more flexible as it relates to getting loans. And so, any thoughts on waiving GAAP financials for retail companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that you see the SEC looking at these kind of issues, and we're often looking through the lens of an agency that deals a lot with very large companies that are very sophisticated, that have years of operating experience. And so it's sometimes hard for us to look at things through the lens of a smaller company. And that's why Congress has sometimes had to come in and say, hey, we want you to do something for smaller companies. We want you to adopt a set of rules that will allow people, will be right sized for the company at different stages of growth. And so I think this is an area where it's really hard for us to move away from, psychologically for us as securities regulators to move away from that. But I think when you start to really think about it, what value does this bring to investors and how much are they paying for it and do they really want it? I mean, yesterday we were talking about a zero revenue company. Why would an investor want to pay for audited financials in that instance? And so I think that's what we need to be thinking about. We have a small business advisory committee, and they deal with their outside advisors who volunteer their time to serve on this committee. It's something that if you all haven't heard of it, you should think about raising your hand to be involved in that. But anyway, they've made some recommendations on crowdfunding specifically and on trying to raise the limits at which point you have to have reviewed financials. And so I think that's certainly something that we should be looking at.
And that particular committee, the association wrote some similar things when we formalized our policy platform. When that committee met in July, made the recommendations to the SEC, we're very supportive of what that committee did and some of their proposals. Moving to
the other thing I'll say is during COVID, we relaxed some of these requirements, and I think we saw positive results from it. So
that's right. That's right. I think that drives the desire to replicate that. So current advertising rules in Reg CF overly complex, very difficult for issuers to navigate. A lot of frustration in trying. People want to comply, they have trouble doing it. In some cases, an issuer could be talking to a podcast host who asks them, "So, when is your deal finished?" They can't say it because it's a term. Certain prohibitions, things they can't. So these rules are many times considered very difficult to comply with. And so you have thoughts on how we can simplify these rules in a way that really doesn't, that maintains investor protection, but makes it more feasible for the people entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to thinking of ways that we can simplify. I think a lot of the rules around how people can talk about private offerings are difficult. I mean, it's not only in crowdfunding, it's in lots of areas. So I'm open to doing that. I think we need to sort of think of it from the perspective of someone who's coming in to raise money who's not a lawyer, and a lot of our rules are written in a way that it's really attractive to lawyering. So we have some resources on our website, for example, our small business capital formation. We have an advocate for small business capital formation. They have some resources that can be helpful. But again, you get on a podcast, someone asks you a question, it's very natural to answer the question. And I've heard that from much more sophisticated people who have been in the investment world for a long time and have trouble with those same kinds of things. So yeah, happy to think about ways to streamline those rules. I think you are going to run into, is this a general solicitation when you start to run into problems around that? But yeah, happy to think about it.
Yeah, great. So CfPA, I'll talk about one of the specific items on our policy platform. We support an increase in the cap that issuers can raise on Reg CF from the 5 million limit today to 20 million annually, and on Reg A Tier 2 from the limit from 75 to 150 million. In fact, I think it's HR 2799 that was already proposed and approved by the House. The increase in Reg A to 150 million. But in terms of and that doesn't look like to be passed by the Senate, but that was passed by the House. But in terms of Reg CF, going from 5 to 20 million, that's something the Commission could actually do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be thinking of raising the limits. Generally, I want to make these exemptions more usable, and I think part of that is allowing people to raise more money, because otherwise you end up spending a lot of money to raise only a little bit of money, and that can dissuade people from even going down that road. So certainly open to that idea, and there's also been a lot of inflation in recent years, so I think we have to build that into our calculus as well.
Thank you. So we have questions that were actually more technical, of a technical nature, and that is, someone had asked us really, what's the process of change to Form C? Because there is, for example, a word in the Form C where it says target when actually means minimum, it should be minimum, and it sort of creates some confusion. For those who are in the audience, television audience, the Form C is the form that a company must file with the SEC before going live with their crowdfunding campaign. Form C. Everyone has to put it in, then you can go live with your campaign. So to get that Form C modified in a way that to be helpful, what's the actual process to do that?
I mean, it depends. It can be, you can do some things, technical amendments in a streamlined process, but it can also be a rulemaking process, or you might be able to do something with changing the instructions. But I mean, certainly that's one I'll take back. I think that's a point actually that hasn't been raised to me before, so I'll take that back.
Great. This week, FinTech Week is taking place in DC. There's a lot of the crypto community that's converged on Washington. You've been seen as generally supportive of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. Questions have been asked that to the extent that crypto is seen as a security, why not regulate investment crowdfunding as the framework for those, for the basically regulation of that?
Yeah, it may work, at least for some crypto offerings. One of the concerns that I've had is I think we've interpreted our jurisdiction very broadly in this area to pull in lots of things that probably don't really belong in the securities world at all. You can set up a blockchain that has a utility token, and it's not clear to me why we would want to regulate that as a security. On the other hand, you could tokenize a stock or a bond, and obviously that's something that is a security, should be regulated as a security. And there, I think we could end up seeing a world in which there's a marriage between the distributed ledger and crowdfunding. So I suspect that this morning, actually, I was at DC FinTech Week, the conference, and was on a panel around tokenization. There's a lot of interesting work going on with respect to tokenizing all kinds of assets, including money market funds in our space. Some other countries have been much more forward thinking, so there's more activity around tokenizing bonds and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see if, we have a crypto policy that's quite confusing to people, and I think if we were able to build some good guardrails there, offer some clarity, we would see more experimentation and things like how we marry these two worlds together.
Okay. Wonder if you could comment on when we might see the updates to the guidance on regulatory crowdfunding.
Look at our agenda, and we don't see a lot of anything related to capital formation. So I think that's one thing that it's unfortunate. We've got a lot of a very busy agenda, but it just hasn't been focused on capital formation.
Questions have come up in terms of how does the SEC view and think about this new emerging area of AI, and how it can potentially play into capital markets regulation.
Yeah, I think we are obviously watching AI along with everyone else. One area that I think can revolutionize things, and I do think can help to provide access to financial advice to a broader swath of the population, whether it's AI alone or more likely AI paired with human help. I think we'll see cheaper and more widespread access to financial advice, which I think will be great. And then it's already, AI, of course, has been used by financial services firms for a long time for lots of different things, but with the rate of development, I think it'll be used more and more. We did put out a rulemaking that would have sort of tried to get it. It was targeted at technology broadly, not just specifically AI, but it really was inspired by the rise in the use of AI, and it would would put a lot of constraints around how financial firms, broker-dealers, investment advisors use AI. It was banned pretty widely, and so the chairman has said that he's going to take us back to the drawing board on that one. But then there's also the question of how can the SEC use AI, and I think we can use it in reviewing filings. I think that will enable us to spend our time on the more interesting and difficult aspects of filing reviews, and some of the more routine stuff can probably be done with the help of AI. And it's probably helpful in people preparing filings too. So I think it could lower the costs of complying with securities laws, which is something that all of us probably.
Definitely. Does anybody not want this reduce the cost of compliance? I think it's definitely high at everyone's list. So we have, as an industry, talked about standardizing around the term regulation investment crowdfunding. Just having standardization around a particular term to differentiate us from rewards or donations crowdfunding. What are your thoughts on that sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, certainly don't want to get into the branding conversation too much. I understand why you want to distinguish yourself. I think it's a sign that crowdfunding is having a good moment, the fact that other people are using it and wanting to use it. But, you know, I think that's sort of up to you. That's not something that we're going to do ourselves. And people have to be careful when they advertise themselves as regulated. You have to make sure that you're being clear about what that means to people.
Okay. Couple late questions we had came in. One is that Reg CF has identified as supporting over 500,000 direct and indirect jobs in 1,900 jurisdictions across the U.S. Based on economic analysis by some of the people here, that's resulted in $8 billion of economic activity. So the question is, what can the SEC do to expand this market and help to ensure that it delivers benefits to the broader community?
Well, I think some of the things that we've talked about, we can find ways to make it a more useful way to raise finance, and we can try to look for ways to lower the costs and enable people to raise more money using it. We can, I think, be there to provide better guidance to people about how to use it. So I think the COVID period really taught us that crowdfunding can be used. I think, as with many good ideas in Washington, when they come in very streamlined, and then people add more and more requirements, with an understandable concern for investor protection. We do have to worry about investor protection. But I think we also have to look at the piece of investor protection, which is access, right? People have a right to be able to invest in companies that they're interested in investing in. We can't always just say, no, you can't invest. And so really looking at it through that lens of a piece of investor protection is opening up the capital market so that people can choose to participate and choose to support companies that they're interested in supporting. That really is a little bit of an attitude shift that I think needs to happen at the SEC.
So we want to leave time for questions from the audience, but before that, I just want to do a final question as part of the chat here, and that is, we're in Washington, huge election coming up, and so do you have a view on how the outcome of the election might affect our industry in the next 4 years?
Well, I think that, I'm not going to make predictions on how the election will turn out. That's certainly not a wise thing to do. But regardless of how things turn out, we know that there'll be a change in administration and there can be a change in emphasis. We are an independent regulatory agency, which means that, as I said, we're governed by a commission. So we're a little bit outside of the mainstream of some other agencies in terms of changing when the administration changes. As I said, the goal is to sort of keep more consistency. But if we were to get a new chairman, for example, you might get a different emphasis on capital formation than we've had in the past several years. And that could be a moment for us to try to make some of the changes around crowdfunding and Regulate Plus And frankly, thinking more about, I know your last session was around IPOs, and I think thinking more about what are we doing wrong? Why aren't companies wanting to go public? What's wrong in that area? So in order to be prepared for that, I think it's really important to have ideas on the table. Let's have a number of ideas that are directly relevant to SEC stuff. So having those ideas on the table so that they can get done when there's an appetite for doing that.
And just so everyone knows, the Commissioner invited us to expand on some of our policy and provide additional information, which as an association we will be doing in follow-up to these discussions. And we appreciate the invitation to do that. Let me leave some time for the audience to ask questions. And then I'm going to repeat your question because that way it can be heard on the television stream. First here, Cal, you're first up.
So I just like to expand it, talk about gap and for smaller and the crowdfunding, I understand, but coming to the world of Wall Street, gap is great, CFA. We have a real problem with companies going to public, CAO, because I think we could expand the small companies' growth that got that to $1 billion. You could have a company with $10 million in revenue. If we try to help one, we talk to 30 firms, they want to do the audit, they're out of the business, and this is going to cost anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million plus, that comes with $10 million in revenue. There's no way to go public.
So the question is,
I think I can, so.
just pause if you don't mind. So the question is about the cost of auditing for certain types of companies who are going to go and do an IPO at high cost of auditing for some of those firms.
Yeah, so I think that is a really important point. The PCAOB has been around now for 20 years, and it came out of some accounting scandals, and there was a real need to have some oversight on auditors. And so, a good mission that it has. But I think part of what's happened is that there hasn't been enough attention paid to how do we make sure that we're not driving smaller auditing firms out of the business, because you're not going to have the biggest firms auditing the smallest companies. You need to have a stable of smaller firms out there so that there's competition, so that when a company needs an auditor, they can find an auditor. And the PCAOB, especially the way it's being operated now, is really making it very difficult for auditors to audit public companies. The cost is really high for the auditors, and so you end up in a situation where it is difficult to find an auditor. And I worry that that's going to only get worse with some of the work that the PCAOB has done in recent months. So it's a very important issue. It's one that I talked to the PCAOB about, to say, you have to think about that end of the spectrum too. You can't just think about the largest firms and the largest audit clients. So it's a real problem. I agree.
Cindy, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thanks. So understanding that capital market formation is necessarily the primary focus within the commission right now. And our policies of how do we improve our being one of the weeks that's involved in writing those policies and having had conversations yesterday, a lot of the question is, well, do we have existing statutory authority within the structure of crowdfunding that Congress gave us to make the change we're requesting? So with that in mind, how important when we are throwing ideas at the wall that ultimately get to the SEC, how important is it that it fits within the statutory framework right now? If some of the things that have changed, I look at some of the changes in the investor threshold, and I'm not sure how the SEC made that change, but the statute says yes. How important is that we know the answer to that question? Or is it more we are on boots on the ground trying to make this exemption work, and this is what we think would work better? Is that more important than the acting intention?
So to summarize, we're looking at how to approach SEC Well, these are good questions.
All right, so I think the question is, when you're looking at the crowdfunding exemption and you're trying to make it workable, you're just looking and you're saying, here's where the problems are with the exemption. Do you, when you come to me and tell me here are the problems, you also have to say, hey, we know you don't have the statutory authority to do X, Y, or Z, but this is what we need. I mean, I think, come to us, tell us where the pain points are. If there's something that we can do using our authority, then we can move forward on it. If it's not something that we can work on, we can pass along the intel that we're getting to Congress and say to them, this is an area that people are experiencing problems. We don't lobby Congress, but we give them technical advice. And so if your experience on the ground is certainly will inform what I talk to them about when they ask me how's it working.
So, a couple more questions. Yes, Brian.
Just thinking about the crypto world a little bit more, do you think that Harry is going to get additional guidance from the commission or kind of relate that to criticism from Congress and others that the regulation might force these things?
So, a question on the Howey test as it relates to crypto and some other guidance from Congress from that level.
Yeah, as to when guidance is coming, I mean, I've been now at the SEC since 2018, and for much of that time have been saying we need to do some guidance in this area, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'm not holding my breath, but we could change course. There's nothing stopping us. Right now, the approach we've taken really has been to try to sort these issues out by bringing enforcement action after enforcement action. So that's the method that we're now employing. Congress they've expressed interest, bipartisan interest in doing something. So I suspect that we could see some guidance or legal clarity coming that way. Otherwise, I think it'll be clarity coming through the courts.
Okay, one final question. Danny, this is it. Gotta be a zinger. Last one. The number of heads nodding on this question.
So this question was around FINRA oversight of crowdfunding portals. And yeah, I mean, certainly we do oversee FINRA. They're a self-regulatory organization that falls under our regulatory purview. But I will tell you, if no one tells me that they're having these kinds of problems, it's very hard for me to know when I have conversations with FINRA, which I do regularly, that this is an area where I should ask them. And yesterday we were talking about this same issue, and the concern around different people getting different answers depending on who they're dealing with at FINRA is something that I'm very concerned about. The issue you just raised of are people being told by FINRA that they have to do things that aren't actually in the rules of statute, that's also problematic. So what I need from people is for people to come and tell me these instances. If you're having problems, if you're seeing these kinds of things, please let me know. It informs my ability then to talk to FINRA and perhaps to try to get some of these things changed. It really is important. My door's always open. Commissioner Peirce at sec.gov is how you can get to me. You can give me a call. I often, when I travel, I'll put it on Twitter that I'm traveling, so I'm happy to meet with you in person if I'm in your city as well.
So with that, we will close out. I just want everyone give a deep gratitude here to Commissioner Peirce for coming in, for offering to be an open door.